Imagine hiking alone in the vast expanse of the Grand Canyon. The sun sinking behind jagged cliffs, the wind whispering through empty washes. You're miles from anyone. Your only companions, the stones under your feet, and the silence around you. Then you start noticing signs, carefully placed cairns, scraps of fabric, and footprints that aren't yours. And that's when you realize someone is watching. This is the true story of the National Park incident, a chilling encounter in the backcountry that will make you question the solitude of the wilderness. I'm not sure why I'm recording this. Maybe it's some leftover instinct, the need to put things in order before I finally let myself sleep at night. Or maybe it's because if I don't say this out loud even once, I'll keep convincing myself that none of it ever happened. But it did. Everything I'm about to tell you took place in the fall of 2019, inside Grand Canyon National Park, on the south rim side, along a backcountry trail most visitors never touch. No lights, no crowds, no guardrails. Just miles of empty, open desert, broken by canyons, ravines, and silence so deep, it starts to weigh on you. And the worst part, the part that sits on my chest every night, is that everything you're going to hear is completely explainable. There's no creature in the dark, no ghost, no supernatural force, just a series of decisions, mistakes, and coincidences that came together in exactly the wrong way. I sometimes think that makes it more terrifying. I started my drive into the park early in the morning, before the sun even touched the rim. The highway stretched ahead like a dry riverbed carved through red earth, and I remember how empty it felt. I think I passed one car in the last hour before the entrance gates, a dusty pickup heading the opposite way, stacked with camping gear. The driver didn't look at me. I didn't think much of it then, but now I replay that moment over and over. If I'd stopped him, if I'd rolled down my window, if I'd asked even one question, well, you'll understand later. I planned the trip as a way to shake off the stress that had been building the past year. Work, relationships, the usual things that push somebody to pack a tent and disappear for a while. I wasn't new to hiking, but I also wasn't an expert. I'd done Zion, Bryce Canyon, a couple multi-day trails up in Colorado. They went fine. I told myself Grand Canyon would be the same. It wasn't. The ranger at the backcountry office was polite enough, but she looked at me like she wasn't sure I knew what I was signing up for. "You're going alone, Frontage?" she asked, tapping out the form with her pen. "Yeah," I said. "I need the reset." She nodded with this soft, understanding expression I've seen on a lot of park staff. The look they give hikers who come in underprepared, but not obviously reckless. I could tell she was debating whether to advise me to choose a shorter route. But she didn't. She just gave me the usual warnings. Keep track of your daylight. Check your water constantly. And if you hear anything strange at night, it's just the canyon shifting with temperature. "Shifting?" I asked. "You'll know it when you hear it." She smiled. "Don't worry, it's normal." Normal or not, those words stayed in my head. My permit covered 3 days. Down the unmaintained Red Butte Spur, across a plateau, then a descent onto an unofficial route called Horseshoe Bend Wash. Not to be confused with the popular Horseshoe Bend in Page, Arizona. This one was different. Hidden, a place the park didn't advertise because it wasn't safe for most visitors. That attracted me. I thought solitude would make everything easier. I thought being away from crowds would help me breathe again. Funny how wrong a person can be. The trailhead was little more than a dusty clearing beside a few junipers twisting like old bones. My car was the only one there. No signs. Just a single wooden post, marked with a faded number I had to double-check on my map to confirm. Silence felt heavy. Not peaceful, just thick. I took a long breath and started down. Most people think the Grand Canyon is endless noisy wind and echoing chambers. On the busiest viewpoints, sure, you'll hear tourists, footsteps, chatter, cameras clicking, kids yelling into the abyss to hear their own voices bounce back. But out here, a mile off any maintained trail, the canyon is quiet in a way that feels unnatural. Even the wind moves differently. It doesn't howl. It slides, like it's sneaking past you. About half an hour in, I noticed something odd, a distant rhythmic sound echoing between the stone walls. At first I thought it was footsteps, but the timing was too even, too mechanical. It It took me another minute to realize what it was. Hammering. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. Repeat. It was faint, carried on the air, almost blending with the canyon's shifting acoustics. I stopped walking to listen more closely. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps. It sounded like someone driving a stake into the ground, or securing something to rock. The ranger's words came back to me. If you hear anything strange, it's just the canyon shifting. But I'd never heard rocks shift like hammer blows, I told myself. It must be maintenance workers. Maybe geology students. Maybe someone setting up anchors for a climbing route. The Grand Canyon covers over 1 million acres. People do all kinds of research and work out here. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound was coming from nowhere. No clear direction. It bounced between the canyon walls. Like something that didn't belong there, I almost turned back. Almost. But I forced myself onward. Because nothing bad had happened yet. Because I didn't want to be dramatic. Because I told myself that every dangerous story about the canyon started with someone overreacting to perfectly normal wilderness sounds. I wasn't going to be that person. Not yet. When the hammering finally stopped, the silence that replaced it felt wrong. Heavier than before. Like the canyon was holding its breath. And for reasons I still don't understand, that was the moment I started to feel watched. Not by an animal, not by a person, just watched. It stuck with me for the rest of the day, and it never went away. I reached my first campsite just before sunset, a flat shelf of sandstone overlooking a smaller offshoot canyon. It wasn't an official campground, just a spot other backcountry hikers had used over the years. You could see the remains of old fire rings, long since buried under dust and windswept grit. I stood there for a minute, taking in the view. The canyon stretched out in crooked lines, the shadows rising up its walls like dark water slowly filling a bowl. I thought it was the most peaceful sight I'd ever seen. That feeling didn't last. I set up my tent quickly, nothing fancy. Just a small, ultralight one-person tent with mesh walls. I boiled some dehydrated chili, ate while watching the last of the light fade, and then sat for a few minutes, listening to the silence. And I mean real silence. People don't understand how profound it is until they're alone out there. It's not quiet, it's absolute stillness. No cars, no humming electricity, no conversations bleeding through walls. Just your own breathing and the faint, metallic click of your cooling cookware. For some people, that silence is healing. But when you're alone, truly alone at the end, it becomes something different. It becomes a presence. Around 8 p.m., I heard the first sound, not the hammering from earlier. Something much simpler. Footsteps, not close, maybe 40 or 50 yards downslope. Soft, slow, uneven, crunching over dry vegetation. They paused. Crunched again, paused. At first I assumed it was a mule deer. They move with that same irregular pattern. But mule deer don't stop and start like they're listening. They don't walk toward and then away from something in deliberate increments. I turned off my headlamp so I could hear better. Sat completely still. Crunch, crunch, stop. Another crunch. Closer this time. I clenched my jaw and tried to convince myself it was an animal. I whispered, "Hello," once, just to see what would happen. Nothing. Oh, said silence, but whoever, or whatever, was walking started again. Crunch, crunch, pause. Then something changed. The steps stopped being irregular. They fell into a steady, unmistakably human rhythm. 2 steps, pause. 2 steps, pause. Slow, balanced, careful, like someone navigating loose rock in the dark. My skin prickled. I finally switched my headlamp back on and swept the beam across the slope. The light struggled to cut through the night. The walls of the canyon swallowed most of it. 30 yards. 20. 10. Nothing. The sound had stopped again. I waited another 10 minutes, hardly breathing, before convincing myself it must have been a hiker camping nearby. Someone who simply didn't want to announce themselves. Maybe they were nervous too. I told myself everything I could to avoid the truth sitting in my gut. There were no other cars at the trailhead, no other hikers on the path, no signs of footprints besides my own. I should have paid more attention to that. The night finally settled into quiet, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing just beyond the tent mesh, staring in. I kept thinking of the hammering sound from earlier, how rhythmic it had been, like someone marking territory, like someone building something. At around 11 p.m., the temperature dropped sharply. The desert does that. Heat evaporates off the rock, and cold sinks into the ravines. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and tried to slow my breathing. Right when I felt myself drifting, I heard another sound. Not footsteps this time. Something softer, more deliberate. A single knock, not on the ground, not on a rock, on my tent pole. Just one. Like the gentlest tap of a knuckle, I froze. My blood went cold. Every muscle tensed. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then, tap, same spot, same pressure, like someone testing the fabric. I didn't say anything, didn't move, didn't even breathe loudly. If it had been an animal, it would have pressed harder. Scratched, sniffed, but this was exploratory, controlled, human. After the second tap, I counted out a full minute in my head. Nothing. Whoever was there had either walked away without making a sound, or was standing perfectly still, inches from where I lay. Waiting for me to react, I didn't react. I stayed frozen until my legs went numb, and the cold burned through my sleeping bag. Eventually, after maybe an hour, exhaustion forced my body to shut down. I slept in short bursts, startled awake every time the wind changed direction. No more taps came that night, no more footsteps, but the fear lingered like a film over everything. A feeling I'd been noticed, marked, somehow. And I remember this very clearly. Before I finally drifted off, I listened to the canyon, the shifting, settling cracking of stone as the air cooled, except somewhere in that natural chorus was a new sound. A long, low scrape, metal against rock. Not loud, but purposeful, like something heavy being dragged. I wish I'd trusted that instinct. I wish I'd left at first light. Because by this point, it wasn't just paranoia. Something was out there, and it already knew exactly where I was. When the first light crept over the canyon, it didn't feel like morning. It felt like relief, the kind you feel after holding your breath underwater too long. I unzipped the tent slowly, half expecting to find footprints pressed into the dirt around me. Something unmistakably human, but the ground looked undisturbed. That should have been comforting. It wasn't, because the canyon floor was mostly stone, patches of sand and dust scattered across irregular slabs. Footprints wouldn't necessarily leave any trace, unless the person stepped in just the right spot. Whoever had been near my tent the night before didn't step in the right spots, or maybe they knew where not to step. I made coffee in silence, my hands shaking just enough that I kept spilling grounds. The air was still cold, but the rising sun was warming the red cliff faces around me, turning them the color of rusted iron beautiful in another context. After eating, I packed up my gear as quickly as I could. I hadn't planned to move campsites. This area was supposed to be my home base for 2 nights, but I wasn't staying another minute. I had no real plan beyond away from here. As I cinched my pack, something caught my eye about 20 feet downslope. Stones, small ones, arranged in a short straight line. At first I thought it was natural. This place is full of odd rock formations, little ridges and lines formed by erosion or rain runoff. But these weren't random. The stones were uniform in size, equally spaced, deliberately placed. I walked closer. There were 7 of them, flat, pale stones about the size of my palm, placed in a perfect row, directly pointing toward my tent. A trail marker, or a signal, or a warning. My mouth went dry. I crouched staring at the stones, trying to make sense of them. Some backpackers make cairns, or guide markers, sure, but those are usually stacked. These weren't stacked. They were arranged like an arrow, a very subtle arrow, aimed straight at where I had slept, as if someone wanted me to know they knew exactly where I was, or worse, that they wanted me to follow the direction they pointed. A strange sensation washed over me, a mix of anger, fear, and the kind of adrenaline that makes you act before thinking. I kicked the stones out of their perfect line, scattering them, The sound echoed faintly across the canyon. For a moment, everything fell silent again. Then, behind me, a crunch, not loud, not close, but unmistakably a footstep. I spun around. Nothing, just empty brush, stone, and the long slanting morning sun. I forced myself to breathe and scan the slope in every direction. No movement, no shadows out of place, no sign of anyone. Still, I felt watched again. That same pressure from the night before, like a weight between my shoulder blades. I grabbed my pack and started moving fast, following the route deeper into the backcountry. I didn't want to backtrack towards the trailhead. My thinking was that maybe whoever else was out there, if anyone really was, had come from the direction I'd come from. It made sense in that moment. Now I'm not so sure. The trail grew rugged quickly. Loose rock, narrow ledges, sudden drops hidden behind clusters of juniper and sage. The wind carried the faint smell of dust and sun-baked stone. About an hour in, something else unusual appeared. More stones. Not arranged this time. Piled. A cairn. A small one. Maybe a foot high. But there was something off about it. It didn't look like a guide marker to help hikers. It looked personal somehow. The rocks weren't stacked haphazardly. They were selected carefully, each one flatter or more triangular than the last, balanced, intentional. I walked around it slowly, keeping my distance as though it was dangerous to touch. Then I noticed something that froze me in place. Wedged between two of the stones, half hidden, was a piece of fabric, dark green, nylon, the same material used in modern hiking backpacks. I felt sick. It wasn't mine. I checked my straps, my frame, every pocket. No tears, nothing missing. Which meant it belonged to someone else, someone who had been here recently, someone who was probably still nearby. I didn't touch the cairn. I didn't want to disturb anything connected to whoever might have made it. Instead, I backed away slowly, scanning the cliffs above me. That's when I saw it. A figure. Far up on a ledge, maybe 100 yards ahead. Too far to see clearly, just a silhouette against the brightness of the sky, but unmistakably human, standing completely still. Facing me, I froze. Every part of me seized with primal instinct, the kind that makes you warm from the inside out, as though your body is trying to warn you with every cell that something is wrong. I raised a hand in hesitation, like some part of me still wanted to believe this was a normal hiker. The figure didn't move, didn't wave back, didn't shift its weight, didn't react at all. Just stood there, perfectly steady on the ledge, staring, or at least facing my direction. Even from that distance, the stillness felt unnatural. No sway from the wind, no head turn, no adjustment of footing, like a cutout, like a marker, like someone wanting me to know they were there. After 10 seconds, or maybe it was a minute, time stretched strangely. The figure stepped backward out of sight, one single step. No hurry. Gone. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt dread, because the ledge where the figure stood had no visible path leading to it. No safe climb. No way to reach it from above without technical gear. Whoever it was either a very advanced climber, or had been standing there a long time, waiting, watching. I didn't linger. I didn't think. I just moved. Fast but controlled, heading deeper into the canyon. I kept glancing behind me every few seconds, expecting to see the figure again. But the ledge remained empty. About a mile later, I found something else. Another cairn, larger this time, and next to it, a second piece of nylon fabric, this one torn frayed at the edge, and a boot print in a patch of dust at its base. Deep, clear, fresh. Not mine. That's when it clicked. The cairns weren't guide markers. They were breadcrumbs. And I wasn't leaving them. I was following them. By mid-afternoon, I'd followed the trail of cairns for nearly 2 miles. At first, I thought they were markers to guide someone, maybe lost hikers trying to find each other. But the more I followed them, the more I realized they weren't meant for anyone else. They were for me, and I didn't want them. Every few hundred feet, there was another stone carefully placed, another piece of nylon, sometimes a scrap of paper, blank, folded, or partially buried in dust. Whoever had been here wanted me to notice that I wasn't alone, that I was being tracked. Eventually, the narrow canyon opened up into a small plateau shaded by junipers. And there it was, a campsite, abandoned, a tent frame, empty and collapsed, a fire ring with the faintest traces of ash, still warm enough to smell the smoke, a backpack unzipped, contents tossed carelessly, but nothing missing. It should have seemed normal. Someone had left in a hurry, but it wasn't normal. It felt staged. I stepped closer, trying to rationalize it. Maybe they had run out of water. Maybe they had gotten scared and moved on. Maybe someone was playing a prank. All reasonable thoughts, except I knew deep down that this wasn't random. I examined the fire ring. Not long ago someone had burned brush, likely gathered nearby, but nothing edible. No cooking equipment, just a small, smoky fire. Odd. I glanced at the tent frame. It was a standard, one-person backpacking tent, nothing special, but the way it had been dismantled, folded, yet scattered slightly, suggested the person had been interrupted, or hurried. And then I saw the footprints, human, barely discernible on the dusty sandstone, but unmistakable. Small prints, size maybe 7 or 8. They led to the edge of the plateau, and then stopped abruptly. No footprints leading away, no tracks anywhere in the direction the person could have gone safely. Nothing. A chill went down my spine. I wasn't imagining the footsteps from the night before, or the figure on the ledge. I wasn't imagining the cairns, the nylon scraps, the stones pointing at me. I knew someone had been here. And then they vanished. I debated whether to continue. My rational mind screamed, "Turn back. Get out now." But the path I had chosen didn't have an easy exit. The canyon was vast, the cliffs treacherous, and my own route back would mean retracing miles through terrain I hadn't mapped in detail. The plateau offered a choice: continue following the trail, or try to climb back up toward the main path. I chose to follow the trail. It was a mistake. The sun was dropping lower when I pressed onward. The canyon wall seemed to lean closer, shadows stretching unnaturally. Every sound, a rock sliding, a bird calling, the faint rustle of leaves, sounded amplified, deliberate. And then I heard it. The scrape. Low, metallic. Distant, but moving closer. Not running, not hurried. Slow, measured, like something heavy being dragged across stone. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced, trying to imagine an explanation. Equipment left behind? Possibly. A climber carrying gear? Maybe. But the sound was moving parallel to my route, following me. I didn't look back. I forced myself to keep walking. The plateau sloped down to a shallow wash, where the next cairn awaited. And waiting for me, on the edge of that wash, was a piece of fabric, nylon, torn, pinned to a flat stone. Not random this time. It had words scratched into it. I crouched and squinted. The words were simple, messy, and unmistakably human. You see me. A note. A warning. A statement. I don't know which. I wanted to drop it, burn it, destroy it. My instinct screamed to turn around and run. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Because even though I knew someone was following me, I couldn't shake the certainty that leaving would make it worse. The trail, the cairns, the scraps, they all indicated this person had been out here a long time, waiting, watching, perhaps for hours, perhaps for days, and I knew I had stepped right into their territory. I set my pack down and tried to catch my breath. I glanced around. The canyon stretched in every direction, walls rising like silent judges. The plateau was empty. No sign of the figure, no footprints beyond the scraps, no sound except my own shallow breathing and the whisper of the wind. But I felt it, that weight behind my eyes, the sense of being seen. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't camp again. Yet I also couldn't climb back the way I came. The ledges were steep, and the sun was falling fast. I made the only choice left. Keep moving forward, deeper into the canyon, following the faint trail that would eventually lead to a secondary exit near a dry creek bed. It was the wrong decision. I didn't know it yet. By the time the sun was gone, the canyon had become a hollow shell of darkness. Shadows, merged into shadows, and the stones along the trail were now nearly invisible. I heard it again, the scrape of metal on stone. Closer this time. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I reached a narrow bend where a small ledge gave me a view of the plateau I had just left. The fire ring, the tent, the cairns, all gone, but a figure stood at the far edge of the plateau, watching, waiting. I didn't stop running until I found the wash, a shallow dry creek, its edges lined with rounded stones and sparse scrub brush. It was narrow enough that I could stay low, unseen from the plateau above, and I collapsed beside one of the larger rocks, gasping. My hands were scraped, my legs trembling. I could barely feel my pack on my back. My heart was hammering in a way I'd never felt before. Every instinct screamed to keep moving, to never stop. Yet exhaustion forced me to stay hidden. I spent the first minutes listening. At first nothing. Then slowly, faint rustling, not far away, deeper in the canyon. Branches snapping under weight. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I told myself it was impossible. Maybe a deer. Maybe a rock rolling down a slope. Anything but what I knew it was. But it wasn't. I could feel it in the air. That same sense from the first night I was being watched. Someone was tracking me. I decided to make camp in the wash. There was no other choice. The canyon narrowed here, walls towering on both sides. If someone wanted to follow me directly, they'd have to find a way down. It was a natural choke point, at least temporarily. I set up the tent as quickly as I could. Minimal movements, just enough to get the shelter standing. I refused to light a fire. No noise, no smoke, nothing to give away my location. And I stayed awake. Night fell early. The canyon swallowed the last light, leaving only stars pinned to the sky like distant, indifferent eyes. The wind whispered through the canyon walls. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was normal, natural. Then I heard the sound, metal scraping stone closer. I froze, clutching the tent pole. My brain fought between panic and rationality. Whoever it was could be out there. Could be following, could be watching me set up camp. I stayed still, listened. The sound stopped. Then came a tap. Soft, deliberate, against one of the larger rocks at the edge of the wash. Just one. Then silence. I didn't move. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed to run, yet I stayed hidden, waiting. Minutes passed, then another tap. I realized I wasn't imagining it. Whoever was out there was marking me, sending me a message. One tap, then silence. One tap, then silence. I couldn't see anything. The walls of the wash rose, too steeply. Shadows, clinging like oil. I whispered to myself, trying to remember the ranger's words. If you hear anything strange, it's just the canyon shifting. I laughed, quietly, bitterly. The canyon didn't tap rocks like that. Humans did. Hours passed. I tried to sleep. Every sound made me jolt. Every shift of wind or falling pebble felt like footsteps. At one point, I swear I saw a shadow move along the canyon wall above me. Not a natural movement, not a bird, not wind-blown scrub. A figure standing still, watching. I didn't dare look for long. Eyes closed, breath held, heart hammering. Sleep came in short bursts, nightmares mixed with reality. My mind replayed the figure on the plateau, the cairns, the scraps of nylon, the words, "You see me." Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound directly outside the tent. A click, like metal touching stone. Slow, deliberate, precise. Then silence. I froze. My hands gripped the tent zipper, my body trembling. Then a voice, low, whispered, almost carried on the wind. Not far, not far. I couldn't make out whether it was male or female, old or young, just a voice. Human. Close enough that I felt its presence pressing down on me, but far enough to remain unseen. My stomach churned. My head spun. I didn't respond. I couldn't respond. The canyon seemed to hum with anticipation. Minutes stretched into hours. The scraping continued sporadically, not consistent enough to track, not frequent enough to predict, just enough to make me panic at every sound. I finally realized the wash wasn't as safe as I thought. Whoever had followed me here could easily be circling. Watching from above, I thought of my car, of the trailhead, of safety. But to reach it, I'd have to leave my hidden shelter and expose myself to cliffs, ledges, and open ground. And I knew, if I left, I'd be visible. I stayed until the first light of dawn. Every muscle tensed, every sound amplified in my ears. When the sun finally touched the canyon walls, I unzipped the tent carefully, peeking outside. Nothing. No figure, no footprints, no cairns. The wash seemed empty, almost normal, almost. I stepped out cautiously and noticed something I hadn't seen before. Small stones arranged in a line leading away from the wash. Just enough to catch my eye, just enough to make me pause. The trail resumed, and I followed it. I didn't speak aloud. I barely breathed. Each step felt heavy, measured. I could feel the canyon walls closing in. Though the wash widened slightly, I could sense eyes on me, even if no one was there. And I knew, with a certainty that made my blood run cold, whoever had left those cairns, those scraps, those warnings, they were still out there and they weren't done. By late morning, I'd been hiking for hours along narrow ridges and small washes, following the faint trail marked by stones and scraps of nylon. My legs ached, my back screamed. From the pack, but I forced myself to move steadily. Stopping meant vulnerability. I couldn't afford to stop, and the canyon stretched out below me in waves of rust and ochre, every ledge and ravine casting shadows that seemed to shift as I passed. The sun was high, but the air remained surprisingly cold in the shade. I thought about leaving the park altogether, calling the rangers, reporting the cairns, the scraps, the whispers in the night. But there was no signal here, no cell reception for miles, no chance of immediate help. The canyon was vast, and the person who had been following me intuitively, whoever it was, Nidkis knew it well. That's when I saw them. A figure, crouched behind a boulder, partially hidden by shadows. At first I thought it was another hiker, trying to stay out of the sun. Then my heart caught. They weren't moving. Watching maybe, but perfectly still. I froze mid-step. My instincts screamed, "Do not approach. Do not make noise. Do not be seen." I ducked behind a nearby rock and held my breath. The figure shifted slightly. One hand rested on a long, thin branch, or perhaps a walking stick. It was hard to tell. The movement was deliberate, calculated. And then they made a small sound, a soft clearing of the throat. My stomach flipped. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was deliberate. I considered running, but in my experience, the canyon didn't reward hasty decisions. One wrong step could send me tumbling down a slope. One stumble, and the stalker would be upon me. I waited. Every second stretched endlessly. My pulse thumped in my ears. Then the figure moved, not quickly, not like they were chasing me, but carefully, deliberately. They stayed behind cover, and following the canyon walls, keeping out of sight but clearly tracking my path. It was a game, a slow, terrifying, silent game I hadn't agreed to. I realized that the cairns, the nylon scraps, the messages, they weren't just breadcrumbs, they were bait. Each one a subtle manipulation, coaxing me deeper into the canyon, into terrain I didn't know, into isolation. Panic rose, sharp and sudden. My hands shook as I gripped my pack strap. I had to decide, fight or flight. There was no neutral option. I chose flight. I moved quietly along the ridge, trying to stay low, weaving behind natural cover. Every few seconds, I risked a glance back. The figure mirrored me, always at a distance, never too close, never too far. Patient, calculating, waiting for a moment of weakness. Hours passed like this. My water was low, my legs were cramping. The sun was beginning to dip again, throwing long shadows across the canyon floor. I was running out of options. Finally, I found a narrow slot canyon. It was tight, walls rising high on either side. barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. It was dangerous terrain. I had to use my hands to scramble over loose rocks, but it offered concealment. I ducked inside, crouched low, and listened. The scraping sound returned. Faint at first, then deliberate. Someone following. They knew where I had gone. They had been waiting for me. I held my breath as the figure appeared at the mouth of the slot canyon. Their silhouette framed against the fading sun. I could see more details now. Sturdy boots, dark pants, a jacket that blended with the rock. They carried no visible weapon, just a long stick, maybe a trekking pole, and yet every instinct told me they were dangerous. Every fiber of my being screamed that I was being hunted. I had to move. But the slot canyon was narrow, and there was only one way through. A scramble down jagged stone, dropping maybe 10 feet to a sand and rock floor. One misstep, and I could easily be injured. One misstep, and the stalker could catch me. I considered hiding further, but the shadows were thin. Soon, night would fall, and I knew from the first night that the canyon's darkness didn't protect you from someone who had been waiting, who had studied the terrain. I made the decision. Carefully, I climbed down, stone by stone, heart pounding. Every rock that slipped under my fingers made me flinch. Every creak, every small shift in the canyon wall sounded like footsteps. I reached the bottom and moved quickly but quietly through the narrow wash. I didn't look back. I didn't speak. I didn't stop. I could feel them above me, watching, following, still patient, still calculating. Hours later, or maybe it was only minutes, time had lost all meaning. I emerged from the slot canyon into a broader wash. The canyon opened slightly here, the walls less intimidating, the floor more forgiving, and there it was, another cairn, larger than before, carefully stacked, almost deliberate in its message. Beside it, another scrap of nylon, pinned to a flat stone. This one had writing again. Don't leave yet. No signature. No hint of identity. Just those two words, screaming patience, calculation, control. I swallowed my fear, my rage, my exhaustion. I couldn't stay, I couldn't confront, and I couldn't turn back. I had to keep moving, because I now understood one crucial fact. Wherever I went, this person would follow. They knew the canyon better than I did. They had time, patience, and the terrain on their side, and they weren't going anywhere. The canyon was closing in. By mid-afternoon, I could feel the walls tightening, the path narrowing, the sun falling lower. My water was almost gone, my legs shaking from constant scrambling, and the weight of the pack felt unbearable. Every step sent a jolt of pain through my knees, but stopping wasn't an option. I kept following the faint trail, loose stones, scraps of nylon, and the occasional cairn, hoping it would lead to a legitimate exit, somewhere I could see other hikers, somewhere I could find a road, somewhere I could escape. I was wrong. The trail ended abruptly at a rocky outcrop overlooking a deep ravine. There was no way down without a technical climb, no path forward, nothing but vertical rock and shadows. And then I heard it, the slow crunch of boots on stone behind me. Not far, not too close. Perfectly measured. The sound made my blood freeze. I didn't dare look. I didn't need to. I could feel them. Patient calculating, waiting for me to panic. I pressed myself against the canyon wall. My heart raced uncontrollably. Every instinct screamed to run. But I knew any misstep here could be fatal. Then, a voice. Low. Controlled. Deliberate. Don't move. It wasn't a threat. Not yet. But it carried weight. Command. Control. I swallowed hard, forced my trembling legs to stay still. The shadow passed over me, slow and deliberate, and then silence. Too perfect. Too measured. I realized then what I had been doing wrong all along. I had been trying to escape through logic, through movement, through avoiding confrontation, but the canyon was not neutral territory. It was theirs. They knew every ledge, every narrow ledge, every precarious step, and they had been waiting. The solution wasn't running. It was patience. I sat down carefully, folding myself into a corner where the canyon wall and a large boulder formed a tiny, natural alcove. My body trembled uncontrollably. I tried to slow my breathing. Focus. Wait. Minutes passed. Hours, maybe. The sun sank toward the horizon, painting the canyon walls in deep reds and oranges. Shadows stretched and twisted, becoming almost animate in the failing light. I heard nothing. No footsteps, no scraping, no whispers. Just the canyon. Eventually, darkness fell. Absolute, heavy darkness. The kind that swallows sound, light, and hope. I had a choice. I could try to descend the rocky slope, risking a fall, or I could stay hidden, hoping the person would eventually leave. I stayed. Hours passed. I felt the night compress around me, my body tense, every nerve alive. Somewhere, in the distance, I thought I heard faint movement, not close, but deliberate. Listening, watching, waiting. I closed my eyes briefly, just to escape. When I opened them, the moon had risen, casting silver shadows across the canyon. The world was cold, sharp, and unforgiving. Morning came slowly. I opened my eyes to faint sunlight hitting the canyon walls. The figure was gone. No cairns, no scraps, no sounds. Just the canyon and me. I waited until full light before moving. I descended carefully to a lower trail, following a creek bed I'd seen on the topo map. Eventually, I emerged on a small dirt road, one rarely used by hikers or vehicles. My hands were scraped, my legs bruised, my pack almost unbearable, and that's when I saw the truck. Park rangers. The backcountry patrol had come looking after I failed to check in. My relief was immense, but still, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from the canyon walls. Even now, years later, I know I was followed. Patiently, silently, through the wilderness. No one saw them. No one caught them. And I still don't know who they were. All I know is that the Grand Canyon can hide secrets, and some people know how to use that silence to their advantage. I reported everything to the rangers. The cairns, the scraps, the nylon, the whispers, the footprints. They listened politely. They took notes. Then they said what I feared. Out here, sometimes people come and go. There are hikers, hunters, survivalists. Not all of them register. Most leave without incident. Some like to watch. That's all we can say. Nothing more. No arrests, no explanation. Just the fact that some people know how to move through this wilderness, how to remain unseen, how to let fear grow, and they will do it again. Even now, when I close my eyes at night, I can hear the scraping. I can feel the gaze from the canyon walls. I can see the cairns, the scraps, the shadows shifting. I survived. But the canyon remembers. And whoever was out there, waiting, watching, they probably still are. For months after the incident, I avoided every thought of the canyon. I didn't look at photos, didn't revisit my maps, didn't even read about hiking conditions. The experience didn't just scare me, it rewired something in me. But trauma is strange. It doesn't always strike at the peak of danger. Sometimes it waits. It creeps back into your life in soft, quiet ways. A sound, a shadow, a sudden memory. For me, it was the tapping. 2 weeks after I returned home, I was lying in bed when I heard something in the early hours of the morning. A soft knock against the side of the house. Just once. It was probably a branch, probably wind, probably anything mundane, but my body reacted before my mind could reason. My muscles seized. My heart exploded in my chest. I sat up, gasping for breath. I knew it wasn't the canyon. I was miles away, in my own home, in a suburban neighborhood. But fear doesn't care about geography. It remembers the pattern. One tap, silence, just like before. Friends asked me what happened out there. Some believed me immediately. Some didn't believe me at all. Some listened politely and shrugged, assuming it was exhaustion, dehydration, or paranoia. One friend, a former search and rescue volunteer, told me a story I've never forgotten. He said, "There are people out there who know how to follow without being seen. They know how to live off the land. They know how to move slowly, quietly, without leaving obvious tracks. Sometimes they're ex-military. Sometimes mentally unstable. Sometimes just odd. You'd never know they were there unless they wanted you to. Then he added something even worse. Most of the time they don't hurt anyone, they just watch. That sentence has stayed with me, because the person who tracked me, they didn't attack. They didn't demand anything. They didn't rush or chase. They just watched. For days, the National Park Service wrote me back 4 months later. The ranger who'd spoken to me the morning they found me had filed a brief report, but nothing came of it. No suspects, no campers in violation of permit rules, no recorded disappearances that matched the behavior. Nothing to tie together the nylon scraps, the cairns, the whispers, the tracking. They wrote it off as unverified, unusual human activity. That's the phrase they used. I stared at that line for a long time. Unusual human activity, not wildlife, not environmental hazard. Human, just without further explanation. Part of me wants to go back, to confront the canyon, to walk the same paths with more knowledge, more caution, more control. But the truth is, I won't. I can't. Because I know something now, something I didn't understand before. The wilderness has two dangers, the natural ones and the human ones, and only one of them watches you back. A year after the incident, I had a conversation with a different ranger from a different national park. We met by chance at a local outdoor expo, and when I mentioned I had been followed in the Grand Canyon, he didn't laugh. He didn't shrug it off either. Instead, he asked quietly, "Did they ever get too close?" I told him no. They kept distance. They stayed at the edge of sight, always present, never touching. He nodded slowly, like that meant something. Then he said, "That's what makes it worse. The ones who don't rush." He never elaborated, I didn't ask. Some knowledge is heavier than fear. I still hike today, but never alone. Never without checking in at ranger stations. Never without a GPS communicator. Never without telling someone my exact route. And although the parks are still beautiful, breathtaking, spiritual even, I see them differently now. I see the quiet corners where someone could hide, the ridges where a silhouette could stand. The dry washes where footsteps echo strangely. The cairns that seem just a little too deliberate. The canyon taught me that solitude can be peaceful, but it can also be watched. People ask why I tell the story, why reliving it helps, why I'd want others to hear it while falling asleep. The truth is simple, because it really happened, because it could happen again, because it has happened to others, and most don't talk about it. Sleep channels share comforting voices in the dark, but some nights, comfort comes from knowing the dangers are real, not mythical. Human, not supernatural. And humans, unlike monsters, leave traces. Cairns, footprints, scraps of nylon, signs that someone is out there. Someone with patience, someone with intent, and someone who may be watching even now, from a distance you will never see.